Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and it's Christmas in July. Unless you're not watching this when I first upload it and it's some other random month, and then the whole bit kind of falls flat. But regardless, this week we're going to be talking about Spawn number 39. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. First published in December of 1995, we get one of the iconic Spawn covers, to the point where this is one of the covers that was used for one of McFarlane's classic covers line of figurines. And to call those action figures is kind of a stretch, since most of them have one, maybe 2 points of articulation. They're more or less just action figure sized statues, but they were pretty cool. In fact, I actually have this quote unquote figure myself, and I gotta say, it's pretty dead on in terms of how it looks by comparison to the cover. And I really like what they did with this cover, as it's not an exact representation of what goes on in the story, but it definitely leads itself into what's about to take place. Story, Todd McFarlane. Pencils, Greg Capullo. Inks, Todd McFarlane. Letters, Tom Orzechowski. Color, Steve Oliff, Quinn Suppley, and Ollie Optics. A special thanks to Kevin Conrad, Julia Simmons, Jeremy Johnson. We see here on the first page that the story starts out in Harlem, where a family of 3 is getting ready for Christmas Eve as they are eating dinner together. This family consists of a woman named Phyllis, her assumedly early teenage daughter, Nadine. It's never specifically stated how old Nadine is, and her young son, Greggy, who is coming up on his 5th birthday. They're just finishing up dinner, and Greggy, of course, is super excited about Christmas Eve and Santa Claus coming and delivering presents. And he's trying to eat himself a few more extra snowballs, aka these are like little cake type cookies if you're not familiar with them. And his mother is like, hey, come on, don't eat too many. You don't want to get sick. He's, of course, promising, no, I promise I'm only going to eat 2. I promise I won't get sick. Just super excited about the upcoming day and the events that are supposedly going to take place this night when Santa Claus shows up. We then find out that Nadine has been invited to a Christmas party with all of her friends, but is unable to attend because Phyllis has to work tonight and she needs Nadine to stay home and watch her young son, Greggy. Of course, Nadine is not happy about any of this and is trying to argue the point with her mother. However, Phyllis states that it's not up for discussion and that she has to go to work. She then tells Greggy goodbye and that she loves him very much and that he needs to be a good boy tonight so that Santa Claus does not skip their house. As Nadine makes her way through the snow to her second job, she is upset by the fact that she can't spend Christmas Eve with her kids, but she doesn't make enough money at her waitressing job to pay all of her bills and has to have this second form of income in order to make ends meet. She unfortunately arrives all of 2 minutes late to her second job. And of course, the evil, super rich woman, who is incredibly cliche, starts to berate her and state that, she expects her to be here on time and that there's dozens of other people who would kill to have her position. And if she doesn't need it and doesn't have to have this money to make ends meet, she's more than happy to get rid of her, as we see Phyllis then start to clean her toilets. I have a few problems with this. Number one, it's absurdly cliche. I get that this woman, Mrs. White is her name, not that it matters, we never see her again, is probably supposed to be a bit of an analog for Ebenezer Scrooge. But again, it feels so dated and played out in this story. And also, the idea of Phyllis having to show up on Christmas Eve and work to clean her toilets makes no sense. As we can see in the background, Mrs. White is having a Christmas party. And if she wanted the house and toilets and bathrooms all cleaned up, she would have had Phyllis come in before the party started to get all this stuff spotless for her guest, not show up during the party to start cleaning all of the facilities while all of her guests are here. That doesn't make any sense. Meanwhile, back at Phyllis's apartment, we see that Nadine is on the phone with one of her friends and finds out that a boy she really likes is going to be at the party that she was invited to. At this point, Nadine decides that she's not going to stay home and watch her 4-year-old brother like she's supposed to, and is instead going to dip out and go to this party. As a means of distracting Greggy, she puts a cassette into the VCR and tells him that he can watch this movie as much as he likes, and that Mom said it was okay because it's Christmas Eve. Greggy, of course, is overjoyed at being able to watch a movie that he really likes, and Nadine then slips out the door stating that she'll be back in a few minutes. Greggy is so distracted by this movie that he really likes that he's not even really that concerned about being left entirely alone, despite the fact that he's only 4 years old. Of course, this is supposed to be the classic Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer special that plays every year on television in America. And Greggy has seen it so many times that he actually knows all of the dialogue and is basically reciting it along with the TV, and also responding to much of the questions or statements that are being made. But again, he lives in this world of childlike wonder and innocence to the point where he's just super happy to be watching one of his favorite holiday films. As the video comes to an end, Greggy is overjoyed to see that Rudolph has once again saved the day, and then starts to fall asleep as the tape rewinds. As he's sleeping, he dreams of a wonderful Christmas morning where he, his sister, his mom, and even his father, who is not involved in this picture at all, so we don't know if he's dead or his parents are divorced or if the guy just walked out on them. It's never actually explained. It's just known that he's not around. And he imagines giving amazing presents to all of his beloved family members and getting a new guitar, which seems like an odd thing for a 4-year-old to be really excited about getting, but maybe I would have thought perhaps some kind of like cool cars or trucks or action figures, but no, Greggy's dreaming of a guitar. As the night continues on and Greggy continues to sleep, he is suddenly awoken by a loud crash on the rooftop that suddenly stuns him, and he's not sure what to make of it, as he even says, "Mom, Nadine, who is this?" We also find out through the narration that his mom works almost every night of the week, so he's not too worried when he's left alone with Nadine. But then we also find out that Nadine very often just dips out and leaves him by himself, despite the fact that he's a 4-year-old child and really should have some kind of supervision. And so he's not really concerned at all when he's left completely alone like this, which does go to point out that Nadine is kind of an awful sister. I understand the idea that she's upset about the fact that she's, stuck in a rut and is having to pull double duty as a caretaker when she wants to, have fun during her teenage years. But due to the financial situation that her family is in, her mom has to work almost all the time, which makes it Nadine's job to take care of her younger brother. And this is understandable. What's not understandable is the idea that you would just abandon a 4-year-old to stay at home alone by themselves with literally no supervision and no one to help them if some kind of an emergency happens. Upon hearing lots of footsteps on the rooftop, he believes that it is actually Santa's reindeer and little helper elves that are making all this commotion, and is overjoyed at the idea that Santa is here to deliver his presents. Of course, it's actually some thieves who have apparently pulled off some kind of heist. It's not explained if they robbed a bank or a convenience store, but they are carrying large cartoon money bags with dollar signs on the side of them, like you would see in a Looney Tunes cartoon. However, they are not going to get away scot-free, as they are being pursued by none other than Spawn. Greggy suddenly realizes that he forgot to put out milk and cookies for Santa Claus, so he rushes to the kitchen to grab the plate of snowballs that his mother made and bring it back to the living room. All the while, he continues to hear all the commotion of Spawn fighting the thieves and believes that it's just the reindeer rustling around and Santa getting his sack of presents ready to come down and deliver them to Greggy's home. However, we see that in fact it's just Spawn beating the living crap out of these thieves, breaking them and making them bloodied. as Greggy races into the living room and puts the snowballs on a table next to the window. We then see one of the thieves get knocked off of the rooftop as Greggy begins to run back to his bedroom so he can pretend to be asleep, and then looks back to see one of the men who is dazed on the fire escape, who is wearing a Santa Claus hat, which only confirms in Greggy's mind that this is in fact an elf, as he jumps into his bed so that Santa won't realize he's awake. One of Spawn's chains then reaches down and grabs the man by the ankle and yanks him back up to the rooftop as a stack of money falls out of his bag and he loses his Santa hat. He then continues to lay waste to the men on the rooftop. Greggy believes that the sound of Spawn's chains are in fact jingle bells. However, it's never explained why he was never concerned about the multiple gunshots that ring out as one of the men tries to shoot Spawn, who of course is impervious to bullets, and then launches the man with a swift punch into a chimney, knocking him out cold. Of course, the men were absolutely no match for Spawn, as he's had no trouble dispersing all of them and they're now all unconscious. Greggy then realizes that he forgot the milk in the kitchen, so he races back to grab it so that he can bring it back for Santa, who will of course be parched after he's had some cookies. Meanwhile, Spawn has decided to make an example of these thugs as he grabs a bunch of the television antennas off of the rooftop and uses them in a very methodical and really kind of disturbing way as we see Greggy take a peek out the window after putting the milk on the table. We then get a big 2-page splash featuring exactly what Spawn did to the 3 assailants as he has them all wrapped up in the TV antennas and his chains, holding them out above the city streets below as of course the men are all panicked, looking down, believing that they're about to die. Of course, they've just had their asses handed to them by Spawn, so they should have already been pretty terrified by the fact that this crazy spiked up chained guy with an absurdly large cape has been beating the living crap out of them. And we then see that, of course, Greggy is seeing this out through his window and is in awe of it, stating, "Wow," as he can't believe what he's seeing. As Greggy looks up at the sky, he does see Spawn and the thieves against the backdrop of the moon, and their silhouettes do in fact look like a sleigh being pulled by reindeer. And Greggy believes that this was in fact Santa Claus and races back to the living room to see what presents he's left. However, the young boy has been counting the presents that have been underneath the tree for the previous week every single day and immediately realizes that there's nothing new there, and we see him start to tear up as he believes that Santa Claus has left and forgotten to bring a present for his mother. He races back to the window and opens it, screaming, "Santa Claus, Rudolph, please come back, don't go. You forgot Mom's present." Unfortunately, Spawn is now nowhere to be seen, and the young boy is very disturbed by the fact that it seems as though Santa Claus has left and that his mother will have nothing for a present under the tree on Christmas morning. However, he then looks down and sees the stack of 20s that was dropped by the thief and realizes that this was the gift that Santa Claus had left for his mother, as he happily exclaims, "You didn't forget," and is overjoyed that his mother will now have a gift to open on Christmas morning. Greggy then grabs the stack of $20 bills, races inside and puts it in a box and quickly wraps it up, putting it underneath the tree with all of the other presents, overjoyed that his mother will now have this gift to open on Christmas morning, as he can't wait to see how happy it's going to make her. And he's just completely overjoyed knowing that she's going to have this wonderful gift on Christmas morning, as he thinks to himself, "This is so cool." The next morning, when Phyllis and her children awake and unwrap their gifts, Phyllis opens the box with the stack of 20s in it and is stunned as she and Nadine both look at each other trying to figure out what happened. At this point, Greggy explains to her the events of the night before, at least the way that he believed that they happened, which should have clued Phyllis off to the fact that Nadine is continuously dipping out on this literal 4-year-old child that she's supposed to be watching, but that never comes up. At this point, Phyllis is well aware that despite the story that Greggy believes happened, There's no way that this was a gift from Santa Claus and that this money does not belong to them. She holds on to it for a couple of days, trying to figure out exactly what she should do with it, as she could definitely use it, but she knows that it doesn't belong to her. She instead arrives on the conclusion that while the money isn't hers, that she should still use it to try and help everyone that she can. So she instead decides to not keep it and spend it on the rest of the building, which is filled with poor families that are in similar situations to her own. She buys gifts for all the children in the building and then uses the leftover money to hold a big party for everyone to attend with lots of food and drink and merrymaking. This, of course, goes over super well with everyone else in the building as they come together as a community to celebrate this time and are very happy with Phyllis and that she would be so generous with all of them. She then takes Greggy aside and tells him to remember this moment and that this is all made possible because of him and the generosity that he had, and that while the money would have been great, it's also more important that he uses his generosity to help others and come together with people that he cares about, and that it's far more important to spread joy amongst as many people as you can than it is to hoard all of that money and try and keep it for yourself. It's very interesting that Phyllis would use this moment as a moment to try and teach her son a lesson about being the best possible person that he can be, and speaks volumes to what a good mother she truly is. We also see a length of garland with some ornaments hanging on it, as we see images of the Fitzgerald family, Sam and Twitch, and even the bums in the alleyway all coming together with friends and loved ones to celebrate a holiday together. And she once again reminds Greggy that family and friends are far more important than any amount of money could ever be. We're then teleported to the alleyway where Spawn sits alone in the snow on his throne and holds a photograph of the Fitzgerald family with his thumb over Terry's face, gazing at his former wife and her new daughter, and longs for that family and that love that he once had as he continues to obsess over trying to figure out a way to get Wanda back, even though she's moved on because Al Simmons died 5 years ago. As all of this is happening, we do get a bit of narration as Greggy asks his mother, "Isn't this the best Christmas ever?" And she responds, "Yes, it is, son. Yes, it is." We then get to Image Info, where, of course, this is just a blog post about what's going on with Image Comics and what was upcoming in 95. Nothing to see here that we haven't seen already. We then get to the spawning grounds, where readers could write in letters that could potentially be responded to by none other than Todd McFarlane himself. Now, one reader writes in and complains about Todd using Spawn in, self-contained miniseries, but that these miniseries also play into the ongoing story, which forces him to buy more comic books if he wants to get the whole story. And Todd responds kind of snippily to him, stating that, it's my character, I'll do whatever I want with him, essentially. It's not quite so bluntly as that, but that's essentially what he's getting at. And I kind of agree with Todd here. I mean, this guy is obviously upset because he wants to get all of this Spawn stuff, but, may not necessarily have the funds to be able to do it. And while that does suck, it is kind of selfish and narcissistic to ask that the creator of Spawn be limiting himself in what he wants to create because it doesn't fit into your budget. I mean, Todd had a vision for the character and he wanted to do these different things with the character and create this big overarching story. And he can do that in whatever way he wants to do it. And, I understand, it does suck that not everybody can afford to get everything that they want to get, but that also doesn't mean that Todd can't make everything that he wants to make simply because it doesn't fit within your budget. And then another reader writes in that Spawn was featured on a Christian television show called The James Robertson Show. I'm not familiar with this show. Todd was also not familiar with this show. I don't know exactly where it aired or what network it was on. And apparently Spawn was brought up on this show as an example of a comic book that was not fit for children. Now, Todd responds by stating that this is because they're just cherry picking the violence and, the more unsavory imagery that exists in Spawn, and not highlighting all of the good things that happen in Spawn, like the Fitzgerald family being a loving couple who try to take really good care of their daughter, or when Spawn tries to help people. And this is true, most likely. Realistically, they were probably doing that. But at the same time, I would probably agree to some extent that there's certain things within the pages of Spawn that maybe you don't want super young kids to see. And as their parent, you're entitled to, have some level of control about the media that they're exposed to. Of course, Todd is just upset about the idea of his comic book being censored by outside forces, which is understandable as well. In an earlier issue, I can't remember what number it was at this point, Todd did bring up that he believes that, if you're a good parent, you can essentially show your kids whatever in terms of media, and it should be okay if you discuss it with them and that kind of thing. And while I get the point he was trying to make, it felt, and I stated this before, a little bit disingenuous in the sense that his own daughter at this point would have been something like 4 or 5, and while he may have allowed her to experience and see a lot of media that other parents would not have with a child her age, I also believe that there was probably stuff that he wasn't showing her as well. You take a child that age, you're not going to expose them probably to really hardcore pornographic images, or, very graphic, like abusive images towards, women or animals or children. Like, I get where he was coming from in terms of the point that he was trying to make, but I also believe that it wasn't just a free-for-all, that he was just showing his daughter whatever imagery and stating that, oh, it's okay if I just, explain it to her. Probably not. I feel like, you were taking the time to censor what your daughter was seeing and not just exposing her to whatever all willy-nilly. We then get this super cool 2-page pinup by Brad Gordy, which I like every bit of. I think this is a fantastic picture, and I think this might be the first instance of a she-Spawn being depicted in the pages of Spawn comic books. I'm not 100% certain on that, but I cannot recall another time where a she-Spawn was depicted in the pages of the book. Now, perhaps she did show up in some of the trading cards or some other media, and I'm just unaware of it. But this, I'm almost 100% sure, and correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, I'll be more than willing to admit that I'm wrong, that this may be the first time we ever get to see a quote-unquote she-Spawn within the pages of Spawn itself. We then get 2 pages of End Cap, which of course is just an update about upcoming McFarlane toys. I will say that this one gets really into the weeds about people who are writing in with questions about production numbers and variants and whatnot. And most of the responses given are explaining that variants, in all reality, are just kind of mistakes that were made in the production factory that were corrected later on. It talks about the overt kill with the 5-cent and the 10-cent being painted on the parking meter. The 5-cent being the much more rare of the two, with only about 3 to 4% of the figures having that 5-cent being painted onto them. I don't know why Todd felt it was so important to have it changed to 10-cent, but whatever. But he also explains that that figure, along with the quote-unquote pantyless Angela, were just mistakes in either painting the wrong number or forgetting to paint panties onto the Angela figure, and that they have no idea how many of these figures are out there in the world or how rare they may or may not be. It's just kind of an estimation. And that if you find one, that's cool. If you don't, then keep looking if it's really that important to you. But that none of this was actually done on purpose in terms of trying to inflate the collector market. Now, the most important part of this section, though, in my opinion, is someone asks how to pronounce Mabalja. Now, that's the way I've been pronouncing it for my entire life, as far back as I can remember, but I've actually been pronouncing it wrong. The correct pronunciation, according to this comic book, is Malbolja. So it's not Mabalja. The L is pronounced, it's Malbolja. Fun fact for anyone who was interested, I definitely was, and I'll try to remember to correct myself from now on, but after 30 years of saying it the way I've been saying it, that's going to be tough. We then get 2 pages of Spawn Direct, where you could send away and order all sorts of Spawn merchandise, like hats and t-shirts, comic books, toys, trading cards, board games, all sorts of awesome stuff. And I would have loved to have had the opportunity to get any of this stuff. Unfortunately, in 1995, I didn't have any money or a credit card because I was a child. So there wasn't really much I could do in terms of being able to get my hands on any of this stuff. But, man, I really wish I could have, especially some of these t-shirts. These are super cool designs. And I would love to be able to get one of these in good condition today. On the final page, we get an advertisement for the Spawn board game, which, as I've stated before, I've never had the opportunity to play, and I've definitely never seen in my entire life. But if I ever came across this board game and it had all the pieces, I would be sure to buy it just because I think it's super cool and would love to have a chance to play it. And on the reverse inside cover, we get an advertisement for the Spawn video game on the Super Nintendo. I have, in fact, played that video game, and I always thought it was actually pretty impressive graphically for the time period. But the game itself is really difficult, so if you ever decide to take the plunge and play it for yourself, just be warned, you're in for a real challenge, and there is not going to be a real easy walk through this game. And that was Spawn number 39. Overall, I actually really like the story of this comic book and the message that Todd is trying to get across by the end of the book, and, really putting forth the idea that while money is important, it's not the most important thing, and that you should really cherish the time that you spend with your friends and family, and that you should really go out of your way to try and help people wherever you can. Again, I do criticize the idea of, one, he made the wealthy woman, Mrs. White, the most cliche caricature of a rich person that he possibly could. And the idea of Phyllis showing up on Christmas Eve during the party to clean the bathrooms that her guests would have been theoretically needing to use doesn't make any sense. It would have made far more sense if she had showed up to work in the kitchen and provide food and drink for the guests at the party. Now, I also understand that Todd was trying to create an image of a loving mother who would do the most disgusting work possible if it meant that she could then provide for her children and that she was putting their needs above her own. And kudos to him for bringing that storyline to light and illustrating that there are good people in the world who would do this. But again, it needs to make sense in the context of the story, and the way he did it, in my opinion, it didn't really. And also, it does seem a little weird to me that he would portray a girl in the story who is supposed to be someone that we should essentially be rooting for because she's one of Phyllis's children and we want to see their lives get better, as someone who really almost doesn't even care about her younger brother, who she's constantly abandoning to go out and just hang out with her friends. But then again, these are just my opinions. Your opinion may be that, Todd was just trying to make a point and I'm looking into it too deeply. And if that's the case, it's okay, because everyone's entitled to their own opinions. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.